Welcome, friends and fellow philosophers, to the Wild Isle podcast. I have with me Alan Ernest. How are you, Alan?
Doing wonderful, man. Glad to be here.
We've been trying to set this up for a while, like weeks and weeks and weeks, and just had trouble, illness, and then bad scheduling and all kinds of things. And what's really funny to me is that as through time, you would have thought, okay, well, what the hell are we going to talk about? We didn't decide, so be prepared for a wild ride, ladies and gentlemen, philosophers out there. And if you're not a philosopher, you're about to find yourself in deep water, perhaps too deep water even for us to swim in. But before we begin, I'm going to shill a couple of things. So, for those of you who do not know, I am an author of fantasy fiction. I have a book out right now called Wand Smoke Broken, featuring a couple of outcasts living in a little coal mining town. Let's see, we'll try to become occult villains and then discover that maybe being a villain is not a great idea. And by the end, they're like nice small town heroes. It's fun. Reads a little bit like a Western in a kind of late fantasy setting. So go check that out. You can find it on Amazon or my website, wildislet.com. And while you're there, check out some of the other stuff I've got. I run a philosophy based blog. Right now, we're going through the Dhammapada. It's one of the Buddhist texts, and I'm analyzing that chapter by chapter per week. But I've also done the four books of Confucianism. I've done the two main Taoist texts, the Zhongzi and the Tao Te Ching. So there's always new stuff each week. You can check that out there. And also, I have an editing service. Now, beware, fellow philosophers, I'm actually going to be updating that soon and revamping myself. And it's going to be more of a Wild Isle style guide. I'm going to dig in deep into a niche. And so be on the lookout to check that out. Anything else that I want to sell? You want to sell anything, Alan?
No, I don't think so.
No?
No, sir.
All right. So, mentioned deep waters. We were just talking before we started recording about essentially the fallible grounds upon which many a relationship are founded. And, you can, just look outside my apartment and see the decay and decadence of the, let's say, pseudo cul-de-sac, if we want to call it that. It's more like a dead end alley, at the mouth of which is a rotting, what used to be a church where ne'er-do-wells lurk about the corners. Um, so, what do you think about all of that? Like you were mentioning before, people, they don't, we'll start with like the relationship maybe just between like a husband or wife, or, like the two spouses, and then stretch it out to the family and the community beyond. So like what the hell's going on, man?
Um, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with like compatibility. You know, when you meet somebody, do you get along with them? Is the conversation's good? Is there that spark between you two? And like one thing that I've been digging into lately is numerology. You ever heard of it?
I have, but I've mostly stayed away from numerology. Yoon brings it up in a few of his books. He tends to relate certain numbers to certain psychological phenomena, particularly multiples of three and four, where three tends to be, let's say, an incompletion of self, and four represents the incorporation of the full self and individuation, moving from like a triangle to a square. And he goes into that in Ion, and I thought I understood the first time I read it, and then I read it again and was realized I didn't understand it at all. And then lately, listening to a lot of James Lindsay, and he has noted that particular derivatives of the occultism that was popular in like the 18th and 19th centuries, and really is still popular today, are fixated on the number 17, though I don't know why. I have the book that probably brings up the number 17 on my bookshelves, like the Hermetica. I just haven't had time to read it because I haven't had time to read the gigantic piles and piles of books that fill up about half of the room. So
Interesting.
tell me what you know about numerology, man.
Fairly new to it, I should say. I guess I just kind of stumbled upon it. I get in these like weird little things where like I something interests me, so I kind of dive a little deeper into it. And here lately, it's been numerology. There's this guy out there called Gary the Numbers Guy. GG33 is what he calls it. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, but his personality is like really abrasive, kind of like cocky, arrogant. But I think there's something to that too, like we appeal to that kind of thing, like the drama in it, maybe you could say. I don't know.
It's a confidence, right? Like,
It is a
yeah.
confidence,
Now,
yes.
sometimes it's a narcissist, but sometimes
Mm,
it's a true leader, and it's kind of hard to tell the difference.
fine line, yes, very
Yeah.
fine line. So when I started like kind of digging into what he was about, it was interesting because um, for instance, I'm a life path number 9. Let's do one with you. When's your birthday?
Hmm. March 23rd, 1992.
March 23rd.
Now everyone on the internet knows my birthday.
March what?
23rd,
3 plus 2 plus 3. What year?
1992.
Plus 1 plus 9 plus 9 plus 2. You're master number 11. You're a rare breed.
Ha ha ha.
Yes. So there's life paths 1 through 9. I'm a 9. And then they have the master numbers 11, 22, and then 33. 33, there's 33 vertebrae in the human spine, 33 degrees in masonry. That's just the beginning. I mean, there's 33 in history. If you can tie it to things, it has this symbolic just meaning. I don't even like it's hard to even describe for me to because I'm not like a master of numbers or anything. They've never been something that I was like interested in. Like honestly, math was never my thing, but as far as like what this guy does, it's incredible because like he says that when you're born, you're imprinted with an energy. Okay, so I'm a 9, so my energy is like humanitarian. I do better seeing other people do well. Like that's and I couldn't agree more with that. Like I've noticed through time that I will give up myself to make others happy. Like and like the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that like that's one of the things I have to be like cautious of. Like be mindful that like I'm important too, right? So um he's actually a 33. Some other 33s was I think Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Edison. I believe Elon Musk is a 33. He claims that there's if a 33 has invented something, then that is the only thing that people pick up on. Like their their energy is so influential and they're so smart that 90% of the things that we have today have come from 33s. So I mean, it's interesting. I mean, how true it is, I don't know, but from what I can see, there's something to it, man.
So the way that I approach such things, because I'm a skeptic by nature, I come out of like from my teenage years, the new atheist movement. Though I like to play around with I don't want to call it the utility of things, but you know, through my early 20s, started listening to a ton of Jordan Peterson, as I'm sure many of you listeners also have. And what I really like, and I'll connect this back to numerology here in like 3 seconds, is that Jordan took an approach to religion that made it for me both palatable, and also let's say Nietzsche might call it something like a tool of life affirmation, right? Something that I could then use as an interpretive structure to benefit myself and others. And let's say, again, Nietzsche might say, fulfill the will to power. And so you could kind of look at numerology in the same way. And honestly, Jung looks at both alchemy and
Mm.
astrology in that lens explicitly. Like, I actually have a book. I have books on freaking everything that I haven't got a chance to read. But his book on alchemy, and then his let's say volume 9, or sorry, part 9, volume 2, something like that of it's Ion, right? Because you have archetypes of the collective unconscious, and then the second part of that is Ion from Jung. He specifically digs into astrology and the, let's say, relationship it has to our, he didn't use these words exactly, but it's like our inherited psychology. So now let's tie it back around to numerology. So if I were to would say give the devil his due, what I would say is that there is some imprint on our instincts um, to have a certain affiliation with certain numbers. Now, if that is the case, if we'll assent to it to be the case, the question is, well, why would that be? And the if it is true, then the answer would be that there is something about the nature of the objective universe that has patterns in it. Those patterns correspond to numbers. That's not very far fetched, right? Like
Not at
in
all.
the same way that it's not far fetched that there's a it's a tendency for things to form disks and spheres because of how gravity works, right? Well, that's geometry. Now, would it be so weird to think that certain number patterns
Mm,
appear with things? I don't think so. Particularly here on Earth where we have a particular set of conditions. So we have a line of ancestors. Those ancestors survived based on how well they conform to the objective conditions of the universe, which means that if there's some numeric pattern present in the way that the objective universe is ordered, well, all of your ancestors that did not conform to that did not reproduce successfully and died, and so therefore the ones that did conform to it passed on their genes. Therefore, it's likely that an instinct over time would come to have, for lack of a better word, shaped itself around that pattern, which is in association with the number, right? It gets a little bit more, what's the word, dicey once we start getting into like, they say something like the number 33 predicting the great men of history and like the Ubermensch, but maybe it does. Who knows,
right,
right?
right, right.
It's fun. It's
It
certainly fun to think about and fun to play around with.
it is.
Um,
It is.
but yeah, but even just you know, for the utility of this, like the reverse engineering I just did, uh, actually brings about a utility in numerology, regardless of how accurate the particular claims are. Right? Um, does that make sense? Like what I'm saying there, like
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So like even if
For sure.
like 33 isn't the exact number, the idea that there is some, let's say, that patterns are not mere abstractions, right? Patterns are how we describe something that is essential and fundamental, which means that there are, let's say, non-material realities, or rather, reality has something like a non-material component, or at least what we would consider non-material. But what that means, again, now we're getting sketchy again, and I have to shut myself up before I run myself into the
It's all right. Keep
hole.
going. I'm really I'm picking it up what you're putting down though. I really am. It's good stuff.
Well, I actually had a question because you brought up we jumped into numerology through uh, the subject matter of the, let's say, decadence of relationships. But you did mention something about like a spark, and that reminds me of numerology a little bit in the sense that like what are we talking about? We're talking about a spark, right? Because we're talking about something in the same vein of, I don't know what, transcendental reality, right? So like is there some type of matching pattern between people in the same way like there might be some matching pattern between um, the way that, I don't know, numbers are, what's the right word, associated with or correlated with certain, I don't know, dispositions of personhood, something like that.
Okay.
So what did you mean when you like were hitting on the idea of a spark between people?
Um, like I said, with the numerology, the energy that you're imprinted with, I guess if we're still going down that path, also another thing that he uses is like the Chinese zodiac. So I'm a snake. Year I was born in 1989. And for instance, the kid's mother is a monkey. So the compatibility between us is not really that great. I guess you could say we're not like a highly compatible match.
No, snakes and monkeys are enemies, actually. I'm pretty sure.
It's not far from it. Yes, it's
Yeah.
like literally 1 year apart from being like real bad. I think so. But like, I guess what I'm saying is like that energy that I was imprinted with and the energy that she was imprinted with, maybe it was like that opposites attract type of thing. Like, we're also in the age of Aquarius, and they say that like the age of Aquarius, people are attracted to like opposite, like not gender, but like skin color. It's which I think that's fascinating in a lot of ways. But I don't know. I guess that what I'm trying to get at with that spark is maybe it's timing. Maybe it's like where you're at in your life. I mean, I don't know if you just like set out the door to say like today's the day I'm gonna find me a kid's mother, like I'm gonna take that leap, so like a lot of things have to go, like I would think really well to get to that point, to where, you hit it off. Maybe it was attraction by like the way you saw her, you thought she was beautiful, and then maybe you thought she was smart because of the way she spoke, I don't really know what that spark is, but like you know what I'm talking about. Like you see, when you meet somebody, and like with us, when I met you, it was kind of like very intriguing to me to like listen to you speak and how in depth you go with, like, you could just tell you were passionate about this, like human psychology, just stuff that I like am a rookie to. I don't really know a whole lot about it, but it's very interesting to me. I really enjoy like hearing people that know things about this. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I don't know exactly where I'm going with all that, but
Well, let me see if I can jump off somewhere from what you said, something you said. So, funnily enough, I don't know if you picked up on it. My zodiac sign for the Chinese zodiac is a monkey as well.
wow, no, I
Okay,
didn't.
and so I want to relate this back to one of Carl Jung's ideas, and he thought actually that well, I'll go a little bit deep with it, but I think maybe that'll be more fun. So he thought within each of us is an instinct that is the self archetype. Now, the self archetype is also what he called the God image. And I'll be parsing in some of my own thought on this, but so I believe it's Aquinas. I have a giant chunk of Thomas Aquinas' selected work, which is like paltry pittance compared to his whole collected work, which would probably stack up to my ceiling. I'll never read in my life.
Huh.
But as far as I've heard, I think it was Aquinas' definition of God is that is which is. And I really like that definition, right? So if God is that is which is, well, that means God is the universe as it is. God is the order that is kind of the backstop that prevents everything from falling into randomness and chaos. God is as things are aside from how we experience them and aside from our mere subjectivity, right? That's why people would say, well, why is God omniscient and omnipotent? Because reality is as it is, so that nothing hides from reality. And when it's you versus reality, reality always wins, and that makes it relative to you all powerful. Well,
Hmm.
okay, so if God is that which is, and I just talked about how our ancestors, like evolution, impressed itself upon our ancestors, right? So if our ancestors were out of accord with reality, out of accord with God, that is which is, they died and didn't reproduce successfully. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means, let's say it's a Taoist idea. Let's say, what is it? Um, Fragmentation betokening virtuosity, something like that. Where the idea is that actually virtue is obtained through being broken against reality. And the idea is that the breaking up against reality fragments you in such a way that you can now fit into um, the position that reality has for you. It's
Hmm.
almost like if you have, that would be, if we were talking about like a Christian perspective, it would be something like God's purpose and place for you. But for you to fit there, you have to run yourself up against reality and let all of the parts of you that are insufficient chip and break off painfully and terribly for yourself to be able to
Hmm.
fit that role. Well, that role is what Jung thought of as the self. Like there's two different self archetypes, but like the whole self, the self archetype, the God image. Okay, so how are we relating that to that spark idea? Well, if Yoon was right, and we have a set of instincts that are, let's say, geared to increase the chances that we fit into our potential place in the universe or our potential fulfilling of God's purpose for us, if we happen to be religious, well, then it makes sense that when you are selecting a partner, you're not merely or only selecting a partner based on the chances that your offspring are going to successfully reproduce, because that's actually not advantageous enough. What's more evolutionarily advantageous is if you have an instinct in you that you're going to pass down to them to make sure you're going to succeed in that reproduction, not just you, but your lineage across time. Because now it's not just you, it's you and their descendants and their descendants and their descendants. And if you have some instinct in you that orients you toward that long-term propagation across time, that fulfilling of potential that puts you and therefore all of your descendants in accord with reality or in accord with God, then you are going to have an instinct that drives you to find a partner that's going to break those pieces off of you that are deficient, right? And that oftentimes means
Mm,
finding someone who is in some ways, or perhaps many ways, in opposition to you, because you need someone. This is Jordan Peterson now I'm taking from. You need someone to contend with who is going to force you to, let's say, get rid of your immaturities and your weaknesses.
wow.
Um, and the reason why you look for that is
Wow.
because by doing that, you pass that down to your children and your children's children, not like a direct, just in case someone got lost in that gigantic stream of verbal vomit I just threw up on the microphone.
That was, yeah, that was beautiful. Beautiful.
Um, in case you got lost, what I'm not saying is
Makes
that,
so much sense to me, though. I mean,
yeah,
it does. It like literally, uh, you couldn't have put it better. Like in terms of like the way that I think about that, that is so true. Like you don't think about that when you're looking for a partner, say, but the person that I have become throughout the time of my relationship with my kids' mother has, I believe, I have become close to the best version of myself that I could possibly be. Virtuous, like seriously, like I don't lie no more. I mean, I might fib and shit, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
I aim, like Jordan Peterson says, I aim in the highest possible direction of good, and and that's the way that I head my life now. Like, I try to live right. So yeah, that's funny that's how it's turned out. Because if you look at it for what it is, me and her, our relationship in general, it's been pain, it's been struggle, it's been misery. There's been a lot of downs, but in return, like I have done nothing but rise. So that's funny that you put it that way.
yeah. I mean, I really think that's I think probably why you're sitting here in this chair is for the same kind of reason, because you'll do that with your let's say the relationship you have with your wife or your husband or whoever happens to be listening, but you'll have that with your friends too. And you'll find that the friends that you get along with too easily are usually the friends that will drag you down into hell slowly through entropy.
Mm.
So if when I throw the word entropy out there, because I didn't realize it, because I sit here as a hermit in my little library and sit and read and write all day and get disconnected from society and turn into Zarathustra up on the mountain talking to my imaginary snake and eagle. Um, but no, I didn't realize like I might throw that word entropy around and people aren't familiar with it. So when I use that word, you know what I mean? Entropy?
I do not.
Okay, good, because that gives me an excellent chance to explain it. So this is actually a dynamic, and I think it's thermodynamics. You'll learn it in a chemistry course. I think you'll probably also learn it in a physics course. But it is the tendency for energy to become homogeneous within a closed system. Well, what the hell does that mean, right? Because it's throwing a bunch of words. So a closed system is a set of circumstances that doesn't have any energy or matter coming in or out, right? So imagine if I had like a closed off aquarium, right? So everything within the aquarium is that system. The surroundings are everything outside the aquarium. The glass is keeping anything from coming in or out. And let's say the glass, let's say it's not even glass. Let's say it's some material that no light or heat can pass through. It's magic, right? Because I need my example to work. Okay, so
Stagnant.
yes, a stagnant system. Now, if you have that system over time, as the energy disperses itself, think of that as like heat energy, let's say vibrations from sound. You're going to have potential energy locked up in chemical bonds. So those chemicals are going to decay over time as they do. If you're familiar with the concept of half-life, it's how long it takes the atomic structure of something to decay down over time. If you just keep waiting, the essentially the energy and thereby the matter in that system will slowly become evenly distributed until everything is an undifferentiated gray blob. Right? It's why things break down. It's just a tendency for um, things to go to the path of least resistance. That's a nice way to think about it, right? Like water just runs along with by the force of gravity. It's not trying to fight it until it hits the lowest point, and then it's equilibrium, and then it's just
Okay.
flat distributed, right? So that's entropy. Now that's in a closed system where no matter no other energy is coming in. Obviously, we don't live in closed systems because like there we have a sun that's radiating the earth. The earth is spinning. There's like things coming in and hitting it. Each system on the earth is being influenced by other things. Like, so we don't live in a closed system. Um, but it's useful to understand the concept because if you do nothing, you are in an entropic state. I'll say that again. So if you do by doing nothing, so taking inaction, you are no matter what, who you are, where you are depreciating, you're rotting, right? You're decaying, you're becoming less. It requires effort just to maintain. We have a word for that, right? Maintenance, just to keep something about where it was. And then it takes even more effort for something then to build. That's super important.
Mm.
If you have any like young listeners, I don't know if I hope I have young listeners or not, right? That might not be good. But it's super important for people to realize that actually to stay where you are requires effort and to move forward requires Herculean levels of effort, right? And how did we get here in the conversation? Well, we got here because the people around you who oftentimes are difficult to be around are the people oftentimes that you ought to be around, like the people who are going to challenge you. Um,
Wow.
or if they don't directly challenge you, what I found is like look for people who make you feel envious, right? And then convert that, or if I like to be fancy, transmute that into admiration, right? So if you're around somebody um, and you're thinking like, oh, I wish I had they had. It's like good. Now copy something about that person. Take the negative emotion, and that's the dog behind you.
Mm.
And then the thing that they have is the golden apple. Oh, I probably should have golden apple because I think in mythology that's always like an object of chaos. Uh, whatever fruit you prefer, right?
Well,
Put that in front of you, and let that drive you forward into the future to become who you know could become. And like obviously there's some pain associated because you're now being chased by a dog, and
right.
maybe that's bad because something nipping at your heels, but maybe you need something nipping at your heels, you know?
Sure.
Um, yeah, I think that's why you might find we all find ourselves in contentious is the right word, relationships that are, let's say, worthwhile overcoming. And we should always oppose those with uh, friendships and relationships that are easy to stay in, and but they suck the motivation dry from you. That's the end of that little ramble. I don't
I
know
like it.
what you have to say about that.
I like that. That's lovely.
Well,
Yeah.
clearly, we don't see people doing that very often, though, do we?
No,
No, not at
no,
all.
not in this society today, because comfortable is it's what we aim for, right? Being comfortable. Like that's like the goal. Like you work so hard to become comfortable. And then once you're there, then what? You just like you say, anthrotrop what's that
Oh, I can't
big
remember
word
the
for me?
word. No, yeah, no, it's
Anthropomorphy
I
or
keep thinking enthalpy, but entropy. There we go,
entropy.
entropy.
Yeah, so you're doing nothing. So in reality, you're really going backwards. Because if you're not going forward, like you say, building, it takes that Herculean effort to, get to that point because it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of motivation. It kind of sucks when you're going through it, but I think once you embrace that struggle a little bit, um, it definitely becomes maybe easier if that's the word you want to use. I don't even know if like because easy isn't something that I like anymore. Like that challenge is what I look for now. Like I want that challenge. I really enjoy the struggle now. Like I've become a fan of suffering in a way. I guess you could say like it makes me feel alive. I guess I really I like the struggle now. Whereas before, like I stubbed my toe. I mean, just for like instance, like I stubbed my toe, that pain. I remember being a young kid and like stubbing my toe or like hurting my elbow and being like, wow, like I never want to do that again. Like that sucks. And like how far I've grown as a person now to where like I don't mind stubbing my toe. I don't mind hurting my elbow. Like I really enjoy the struggle. So it's kind of funny how that works, when you embrace it a little bit.
Yeah, well, I told this to my buddy Josh, who has been on the podcast a few times, quite a few times, um, and I played around with that idea that it's in the preface of Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche. He starts out saying, supposing truth were a woman, what then? Right. And I really like the metaphor. It's funny. One, I burst out laughing the first time I read it, but I really thought about that. Okay. So like, this is a bit of a male centric perspective, but put up with it, listeners, philosophers, like it's probably all making men listening. Um, well, if it's on YouTube, but which it is. But anyway, supposing truth were one, what does Nietzsche mean by truth in that instance? He's really talking about like objective reality. That is which is that because that is what is true and is in fact that is what is really real. And I thought about it this way that when you get the proper perspective and you understand that reality is like very much like a woman. Now, what is a woman like? Well, a woman often wants to love you, but in order to love you, you have to be worthy. And in order to be worthy, you have to be willing like to put up with not only the world and all its hardships, but also like her, right? Because she's going to have a bunch of burdens that you're now going to need to take responsibility for. If we think of this in a very traditional way, you can just think of it like children, right? Like you get a wife, then you have kids, and now you have to maintain this house and these kids, and then also yourself so that your wife still likes you. And like it's a bunch of work.
For sure.
But if you think of reality, now we're talking about a metaphor for existence itself, is like the woman that wants to love you if only you're worthy, and she wants you to be worthy because she's the beneficiary. And then once you make yourself worthy of love by the universe, or if religious, let's say loved by God, then she'll accept you in a warm embrace, and you'll come to see the universe, will come to see life itself and all of its sufferings and all the duties and obligations and pains and burdens it places upon you as a thing that is welcoming, as a thing that is warming and loving. And we do what the Greek Stoics often tell us to do, and to be honest, the ancient Chinese tell us to do the same thing, and the Buddhist Indians, is that you move your aversions and your desires, things you want and want to avoid, in accord with how the universe is. So it's no longer, I want it to be this way, therefore the universe should change for me. It's, I have molded myself in accord with the will of the universe, if you want to say it that way, and thereby come to be loved by the universe and able to love the universe back,
Mm,
right?
mm.
So I don't know. I found that to be an incredibly helpful metaphor. I don't know if I'd call it it's not really an analogy or allegory either. It's not an allegory because it's not a story, but let's call it a metaphor. And it's been very useful for me to find perspective in what it means to, say, stub your toe. Because once you have that perspective and you stub your toe, and it's like what does that really matter in the grand scheme of things? Like
Right.
I've suffered this small amount of pain. It's like, okay, like that too is a part of life. Am I going to now cut off my toes so that I never have to stub my toes again, or like throw all my tables out the window? No, like having toes and having tables and chairs also require, if I love having those things, I also must love stubbing my toe,
Right.
right? Because you can't really get one without the other.
Right.
But now you obviously are sitting here smiling at me as I'm giving you this explanation. I find most people don't. They don't really like to hear what I just had to say. What's been your experience trying to explain to somebody the new perspective that you have on suffering?
Um, I guess that when you voluntarily accept it, when you voluntarily accept that life is suffering in so many ways, there's no way around it really. So, and like instead of fighting it, which I did for a long time, blame God, blame him, her, everybody, because myself was perfect, right? Um, Once I got so much, let's say, I don't know if I was ready for it, but like once I started piling on the responsibilities of kids, the clothes, the dishes, the struggle of just raising four kids, like once I took that all into perspective and realized that like there's no way around this other than running. Like I can turn, run, have a good life, but that just wasn't in me. So like, I guess
What stopped you, man? What stopped you from?
that's funny, right? That's funny. I don't know. I can't even begin to tell you what it was that made me stay, because I knew what it was. I knew right then and there that it was not going to be fun, right? Like it, because like it, in order to be a good father, a good role model, anything, a good husband, like part of you has to die, right? Like it has to die because you're selfish, your ego, your pride, that's what gets you to that point anyway. Look how awesome I am. That's how you end up mating, I suppose. Like you got this persona, like you're the best. So,
So there's some battle. There had to be some battle with yourself at some point, right?
oh
Because
boy,
because there was the self that wanted to run, and then there was part of you who that didn't. What was that for you? What was that like? Like what? Because I know you said it happened. Like there was just a moment where you had to decide.
right.
It was like kill or be killed, and who was going to win? Who was going to live? The higher or lower self? Like, can you remember? Because it might have just.
I mean, I think I still struggle with it sometimes, right? Like I think it's still in me a little bit, like but I think when I fully accepted, like when I found that there was a little bit of hope in that, I think it was by my last daughter, my last baby that I had, MJ. Like when she said she was pregnant with her, I was like, at this point I started like putting a lot of investment into myself. I started like really digging into some things like psychology, philosophy, God, everything, like what are we? Uh, and I started like, investing in myself a little bit. I started getting into crypto and the stock market and just like the economy, just everything. I found that love for life again, because like when I was growing up, I was constantly into sports, and my mom, kind of pushed me in that direction. Like, I guess I was really what do you call it? Like I wanted to make people happy, right? So like I did a lot of things not for myself but for others, right? So like I think when I started actually like caring about me and what I wanted to be was about that time. Like I'm 33 now. So I say I didn't really honestly take that step till I was like 30, like fully at 31, like fully embrace that I'm a man. It's time to move. It's time to grow up. Like it took a long time to get that. Like, like I said, when MJ was born, or like I found out that she was going to be born, that little girl, it was kind of like I kind of had hope in my life again. Like I was empty for a long time. Like my 20s, I was a drug addict. Like no other way to put it. Like I was addicted to drugs. Like, and then through it all, um, I've seen people die. I've been broke, been just despaired, the lowest point you could possibly go. Like you don't think you can go any lower, but there's always another level down there that you're going to reach, because like that's what it is whenever you give up. Like, that's essentially what it was. Is I give up, and once I started pulling myself out slowly of that pit, and like really embracing it, like it's like 30 years old, man. 30 at least. I'm 33 now. Be 34 here in November. So I guess once I started investing in myself a little bit, uh, believing in myself a little bit. It was 10 years of despair though, for real, like 10 years of failing every day that I woke up. No hope. So like, how do you go from that point to this point and then, build off that? Like, I don't know what day it was, right? But it started with a thought, no? Like, cause I fought that my whole life, like my whole 20s, I fought that that feeling of being an addict, of using, like every day you wake up having to get high just to dull the memories, and then like that sense of life that you just I don't know what it was about that I just couldn't accept, right? Like I couldn't accept the good, the bad, the anything. Like I had to dull all that. So yeah, it's funny to be here now though. It is. It's like it's refreshing, it's enlightening, and like I said, I have hope again, like I'm alive to say.
Yeah, tell me this, man, because I'm trying to dig at something that I've never seen anyone be able to articulate exactly, and because I think it's something that's so it by nature evanescent. But there seemed to be a moment that wasn't exactly a rock bottom because yeah, I just actually recently, a week ago, I think, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, finished the NA basic text that my Josh lent to me, and reading through all these anecdotes, and everyone kind of talks about hitting quote unquote their rock bottom. But what you said to me was different because you didn't say you hit a rock bottom. You said that at around about the same time you discovered let's say, or rediscovered the responsibility of being a father yet again, because you're going to have another kid born. So that's like, if you think of like cycles of rebirth, each new child coming into the world, that is like a new soul for which you are responsible, and you have an opportunity each time that happens to decide what you're going to do in regard to that kid. But at the same time, you said you discovered that there is no bottom. So it's not that you, and tell me if you think this is wrong, but for what I heard, it was that not that you hit rock bottom, but that you discovered that that because there is no bottom, that you could keep going down, and that realization, that you would call it an elevation of consciousness, a sudden dawning realization about the fundamental reality of your existence, that actually hell is a bottomless pit,
Mm,
bottomless. You will keep going.
mm.
It sounds to me that that made you realize that no amount of running or self narcoticizing was going to protect you, because you're going to keep going down to deeper, darker, hotter flames.
For sure.
And that, and almost like that realization of, if I don't want this to continue to get worse, I have to go back up.
Right.
Was that, does that
Yeah,
sound,
for sure.
does that sound,
Yeah, that's spot on. Spot on.
yeah, and I understand taking 10 years, man. Like I struggled with depression for all of my 20s, all of it, the whole thing. And it's funny to me because like my life was relatively easy. Like it's, you hear that with celebrities, especially because they have like a lot of money, a lot of fame and status, and then they'll kind of come out and try and talk about their depression. Everyone's like, "Your life is so easy." But I think the reality is that our social status and material possessions are actually not very relevant to our, let's say, psychological and spiritual well-being. Like they're,
Preach.
yeah,
Preach.
they're totally separate, and really the deepest, let's say, most important question involved with human suffering and despair is, can you accept life as it is? Right. And if that question, it doesn't matter how wealthy or comfortable you are. In fact, there's a lot of argument that the more comfortable you are, the worse it is,
Mm,
the less you're able to accept, let's say, the limitations, constraints, and laws of reality itself.
mm.
But yeah, you think that it was that realization that hell is a bottomless pit, that there is no rock bottom, and there's no, like, almost like even death is not an escape. Like, maybe it is, but like, let's just say it's not, right? Like, even that's like, okay, there's no escape. Like, what I'm doing is not escaping. So that's kind of how what clicked for you at that moment.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's like being empty. All like, you got a cup here that's just empty. And like, it just keeps getting like lonelier and like darker and like, it's like there's something in you that tells you like, I don't know what it is, but for me anyway, I can speak for myself that like you want to do right, you want to do good, and when you're constantly taken away from what you think you should be, like you just become uh just this empty vessel. You're just alive, like but you're not really alive. I But like what I discovered is you just like you say, if you're not going forwards, you're going backwards. So like every day just got a little lonelier, a little darker, a little dimmer. And I mean, how long could you go that long? Like how long could you go with that feeling of like you're doing everything wrong? It's just I don't know,
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to explain, but it's like when you're living it, it's hell, pure hell, right? Like I don't know, like I don't know how long. like I've seen addicts go their whole life doing it though, So like I've seen it personally. Like you can continue down that because there's almost something comforting in it too, right? Like there's almost like that. Like I heard someone explain this to me. When knowing someone's pissed off at them helps them sleep a little better at night, keeps them warm. Like I've heard someone say that before, and it like clicked with me. I'm like, yeah, I could see what you mean. There's something to that, right? Like there's something to like people being pissed at you, like maybe makes you feel important, or like like you're living in their head rent free. Like there's something there to that. I just don't know what it is exactly.
Yeah, well, that is the will to revenge. So Nietzsche talks a lot about this. We have a will to power. What does that mean? Because oftentimes people think like will to power being like a tyrannical authoritarian like asshole. That's not what power means. Power is your ability to manifest your will in the world, right? So I have a desire. If I can manifest that desire into the world, then I have that power, right? Pretty simple definition, and it's actually kind of innocuous. Like if I have a will to power to make a good cup of coffee and I can do it, then I fulfill my will to power by making a cup of coffee in the morning.
Right.
As simple as that. Well, Nietzsche describes, particularly in the genealogy of morals, that when you are weak, the weaker you are, the less you're capable of fulfilling that will to power.
Mm,
And what it does is it turns you against being itself
mm,
because you keep looking at
mm.
your own limitations and then, like you described earlier, projecting them as everything else's fault, right? You keep looking at like,
Victim.
yeah, you become the victim, and then that makes it. It's a you feel justified in
Right.
taking revenge, and there's a pleasure in taking revenge because you feel as though you're now like an agent of justice, bringing about at least some amount of your will. Like if I can cause somebody else suffering, then I can at least fulfill that, right? And it feels good.
Right.
And why do we have I actually have an explanation as to I think why we have that instinctively because it's in us, it's in every human being, right? um I even named the last podcast I talked with Josh, that was the spirit of Cain, because that is Cain's fundamental driving, let's say, anima, right? It is his desire to take vengeance against God, so he kills his brother in the fields, because he doesn't want to live up to the fact that his sacrifices were inadequate in the face of God, right?
Mm,
So we all have that spirit of Cain, but we also all have that kind of union God image, and we kind of we see what happens when people don't fulfill that God image, is that this is getting a little perhaps biblical about it. They pass down their sins to their descendants, right? In the same way, if you look at like the Garden of Eden story, you've got the sins of Adam and Eve that get passed down to their descendants, and we do the same thing, right? Like when we fail to live up to our what's the best way to describe it? When we fail to live up to our potential, the degree to which we fail to live up to that potential, our own children are now cursed with overcoming the hurdles that we failed to overcome, right? So, like for me, I didn't have a dad, just wasn't around. He was in prison, mainly because he was like a delinquent, right?
So statistically speaking, the odds that you're here sitting now, even aiming in a direction of good was like very low, right?
Yeah, relatively low. And there's lots of members of my family who have failed in that regard. Lots of other people in a similar situation who have failed. And actually, the only reason I didn't fail is because I got involved in martial arts as a young teenager. And for those of you who don't know, I believe it's the Cantonese pronunciation, Sifu, is the character used to spell that is the combination of the word teacher and father, right? So I had a surrogate father figure, and in a way, kind of multiple surrogate father figures and discipline that you get from, let's say, your father embedded in me to bring me up out of the situation of having what's called, you'll know, the devouring mother, right? The mother that makes your life so easy that you're this weak, frail being, and then that makes you like Cain, where your sacrifices are always inadequate. You blame other people.
Mm,
That's what saved me, basically. Otherwise, I would have been screwed. Um,
wow.
but that kind of harkens back to the very beginning of our conversation, because we look around and we see the degeneracy of all forms of relationships, but that now we're talking at the level of the family, right? So, someone goes their whole life allowing themselves to, um, you know, uh, entropy, allowing themselves to decay and sink further and further into hell. And what that means is that the mouth of hell, will gape open a little bit wider, and then some of their kids will fall in.
Mm,
And then eventually what happens is somebody else's kids start to fall in.
mm,
You see what I mean?
mm.
And then all of a sudden you look outside and then it makes sense. It makes sense now, right?
It does make
Because
sense.
I don't know if you had a dad when you were growing up around.
Yeah, I
You
did.
did? Oh, that's great.
Yes, I did. I did have a father, and I mean, even to this day, like I love my dad to death, but he had demons too. Like he even to this day struggles with alcohol. So there was a lot of nights that I laid in bed waiting to hear that truck pull up the driveway, like, oh fuck, here we go, fucking. But I think that's like that thing you're talking about, that generational curse that like got passed on, right? And I think I had a little taste of it too with the demon I was beating off my back too. But like, I don't know. For now, it's at bay. But yeah.
Well, yeah, and look, and you can even use your own example if you want to, right? Like, um, juxtapose or compare yourself now compared to had you decided not to um, try to get clean, right? And then now push that forward 20 years. What what influence, what impact is that going to have on your own kids, right? Like, obviously, it's better to get clean, right, than it is, yeah. And so but you can kind of see like a demon was passed down to you, right? And maybe that demon even festered in you to become a bigger demon than it was. Like maybe it wasn't even as bad in your father, but like if
Father.
it's just once it's passed down to you, it's like it's going to grow, right? Like if you leave it alone, it decays like if you take a rotten piece of food and you leave it there, it's not going to get less covered with
Mm,
bacteria. It gets worse, right? It
for
gets more
sure.
covered in parasites, and then it becomes, in a sense, sometimes more and more difficult for one to expunge it. But then you can through let's say great self-sacrifice, right? This is kind of Jordan Peterson when he says like bear your cross, drag it all the way to the top of the
Mm.
hill. Nietzsche in his last book before he went mad, he calls it the Antichrist.
What? Why did he get mad? Syphilis, right?
Some people think it was syphilis. Some people think he was faking it because they would go and like you could sometimes visit him in the asylum and have like a total normal conversation.
Huh.
And you come back before, and then he was like bedridden, and sometimes you'd go insane and play like the piano like a madman and start dancing. Like, who knows? Yeah, it had a crazy end in his life.
Huh. How old was he?
I think he was in his early 40s, something of that age.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, but with where was I? Uh, so we're talking about demons, and then being able. Oh, with the Antichrist, right? He calls the book the Antichrist, but like halfway through the book, he stops and says, "Well, you know, is there anything that we can take from the art narrative archetype of he doesn't use those words, but of the Redeemer?" And then he basically goes into interpreting the Christ story in the exact same way that Jordan Peterson does, which tells me that Jordan read Nietzsche's interpretation and should be giving him a little bit more credit because it's like Jordan, you got this exactly from Nietzsche. And
Right.
what Nietzsche says, though, is what actually makes Jesus Christ a proper redeemer figure is that he, despite being unfairly persecuted, he says, "Father, forgive them; they know not what they do." Right? So it's like I'm looking at the
Mm.
unfair treatment of the universe, and I'm not going to blame you, God. I'm not going to blame all these people. I have the attitude that redeems that which embraces the fact that terrible evil must exist in the universe for the universe to be for being to be itself, and that's the proper redeemer archetype. It's not a scapegoat that died for your sins. It is the emulation of the attitude that you will, let's say, forgive the trespasses against you, because otherwise you will become resentful and bring the world to destruction out of some stupid sense of self-righteous
Mm.
justice. right?
We all go through that though, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we all go through that. That's a real thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned before that you know, the monkey never really totally climbs off your back.
No,
Like instead you repeatedly face up against it again and again and again, right?
it
It's not.
manifests in other ways. It's just there, right?
Yes, it is. And you talked about it, you and Carl, you talked about it that way as well. That this is not. You don't reach completion. You don't reach perfection. You move toward it. And for that, I really like to think in terms of the Taoist, right? Because Tao means way, path, or road, right? So the goal of Taoism is not to reach the destination, it is to keep yourself on the road,
Hmm.
to keep yourself on the journey. The whole point is a continuous process, that there's no concept of an end, right? It's merely you hold to the road and you try to stay on it as it twists and bends, and it's like a river. It's never the same. You know, a river's never the same twice, because it not only is the water flowing, but over time the course of the river changes with the erosion. Um,
Path of least resistance, right? Like water's always going to go to its lowest point, huh?
yes, and in a sense, what they think in Taoism is we need to be like water, and you need to be willing to go to your lowest point, or really look at yourself at your lowest point,
I love that.
and that's where you reach equilibrium. And then from a place of balance, from a place of equilibrium, only then are you steady enough to be able to reach up and, let's say, push off from where you are, right? Because if you're off balance when you try to carry a load, you fall over. And so you have to go to your lowest point. You have to be willing to
Mm.
see yourself as you truly are, and then from there your feet are sturdy enough on the earth that you can hold up the weight of the sky. There's some mythological significance to that. We don't have to dig that far, because it's been a while since I've read Joseph Campbell, and I'm not that well versed.
But
So
like, how did like mythology, like, how did it have such a good understanding? Like, if you, is it just the way that we see it and interpret it that makes it, appeal to us, or like, was there really like the people before us, like they understood things like that? Like, what is that?
so I just listened to a podcast about the pre-Socratic philosophers, so the philosophers before Socrates, and before that you have the Homeric, so like the poet Homer, like the guy who told the Odyssey, right?
Or
And so that's we're getting into Greek mythology. Now, what you understand, we even understand this if you start reading like Plato's Republic. I believe that's where I'm remembering this from. The way that people thought before the development of the idea of the logos, which Jordan likes to talk about the logos a lot, particularly in the Christian sense.
what is the logos?
So, to keep it really basic, the logos essentially is like that which is logical. So, how best to how best to say this? Logic is that which follows, right? It is that which is coherent with itself, as opposed to that which is chaotic. Now, before you have that, what you have is a mythological or narrative understanding of the world. Now, what is a narrative or mythological understanding? Well, we have a set of instincts that, let's say, are patterned to make us survive in the world. Because again, the whole line of ancestors that lived or didn't live, and that line of instincts um, operate under what Jung called essentially the projection making mechanism. I think is what he called it, roughly translated, because he wrote in German. But what that means is that we as biological entities have a biological, let's say, pattern recognition. I can't call it a machine. You can think of it like language. Like babies are primed to learn language. They have parts of their brains that are looking for sounds to mimic
It's
and then to
incredible.
form language, right?
It's incredible.
Yeah, that's why humans do it and a bunch of other animals don't,
It's
right?
incredible. It
So
truly
there's
is.
now you still need to interact with the world. You still need to hear the language as a baby to learn it, but you have to have the biological structure already there that's ready to look for language like things. Now, in terms of mythology, it's the exact same thing. We have structures in our body and our brain that are primed to detect things that match certain patterns. And then what we do is um, we take that projection and we overlay it onto the thing itself. So we see reality, and then our instincts say it's kind of like X, Y, and Z. So it's like, the objective universe is kind of like a judgmental father that's all powerful and always watching everything you do,
Hmm.
right? And that was like if you got to watch the debates between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson forever ago, that was what Jordan was trying to explain to Sam, right? Like at one of them, like what is God? God is like if God's the objective universe, and the objective universe is like a judgmental father, and he is watching you all the time because you can't escape the objective universe
Mm.
because it's what's real, and it does judge you, like it does punish you when you transgress it. Like if the wall is there, it does not matter if you think the wall is there, you run fucking into the wall and it stops you.
Facts.
Right. So
That's reality.
yeah, and so when we think of mythology, it's the same thing. We're like, okay, like it's sort of like Apollo pulls the sun. I'm pretty sure it's Apollo who pulls the sun across the sky, right? Now maybe there isn't a dude in a chariot literally pulling the sun across the sky, but that's not important. I now, with that mythological understanding, I understand that uh, the sun, according to me, and a human being living in like ancient Greece, I've got this understanding. Oh, look at that! We're a professional on this podcast. Oh shit. Sit down for a second. So we have an understanding that the sun comes across the sky. Now, maybe, scientifically minded modern people are going to scoff at that, but like, let's look at something more behavioral, right? So let's say, how is it that you should interact with the generations that come before you? And Jordan loves this one. Well, like maybe you need to be like Horus, right? So when the institutions around you, that would be like Osiris the king, become tyrannical and blind, and then their evil brothers take over. So then the institutions become corrupted. Maybe the goal is to reconstruct the pieces of your father and then give him one of your eyes, that's your vision, so
Mm.
that he can now so that the institution can now function properly, right? As opposed to having this revolutionary idea where, okay, well, the institution becomes corrupt, therefore we just need to decimate it and then try to reconstruct it from scratch with
Hmm.
no bearing to what worked before. Because like how well that's going to work. Like the universe is so freaking complicated. Like you think you're going to be able to just build a social structure and it's just going to operate. Like no, it didn't. Even like the reason why the American Revolution worked and the French Revolution was a disaster, that they had to reform their government I don't know how many times and just butchered multitudes of people. It's because what the Americans did is say, okay, let's look at like Athens and let's look at Rome, and we'll take our English common law. So all the stuff that they had come from before and things they had
Hmm.
known about before, where did they go wrong? What worked? Let's see if we can piece together what worked. And then, so even though you had a revolutionary foundation for a country based on, let's say, the liberal enlightenment, so a particular ideology, it still had the component parts of the tradition, even though it was animated by a new spirit. That's the eye of Horus given to Osiris. So then all of a sudden you see the myth, the story about Horus and Osiris and Set and Isis, or Egyptian mythology in this case, is telling people something true about
Mm.
the universe. And I took that all from Jordan, by the way. Like I
I
didn't.
like it.
I'm totally ignorant of Egyptian mythology right outside of that. So you tell ask me another question about it, I can't tell you.
I
But
got the visual, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. So you get for those of you who haven't heard that set of stories before or have not had it explained in that way, that's what mythology is doing. And by the way, that's true for all stories. I'm gonna go on a very short tangent because I want to sell myself again. So I mentioned before at the beginning of this, I'm going to be essentially doing like style guide with editing, but I'm also going to be working particularly with theme. Theme comes from the same root. In fact, I think it's an earlier root to the word thesis. A thesis is an argument or claim about like how reality is. So every story is a narrative or story-based argument, and the argument made depends on how the story concludes itself, right? So in that story, when your father becomes blind and corrupt and murdered and ripped to pieces by his evil brother, right? Or in metaphor, when the institutions become corrupt, the way to restore order is to reconstruct the old order with new vision, right? So that's the argument being made by the story, but that's true for every single story. And one thing I want to be able to help people to do here soon, and I'll stop shilling myself, is to be able to help people understand that when they're writing a story, it doesn't matter if you're trying to do this. The conclusion, the way your story concludes, based on the center conflict, which is really the problem that you're trying to solve. If you're writing a good story, by the way, I took this again from Jordan, but um, he talks about it from like an essay. I think it's true if you're writing fiction as well. A good story, a real piece of literary art, is that the center conflict contains a problem that you yourself want to find an answer to that you don't already have when you go to start to write, which means I don't know how this is actually going to end. You have to be willing to take that risk as an author, right? And then if you can maybe think about this away from fiction with your own life if you want. But you have to know, I don't know how this is going to end. Here's the problem, and here's the situations leading up to that. And now I had to, in the midst of constructing the problem, in the case of writing, figure out how the characters, or perhaps me, how I am going to solve this issue. And then that is how you actually find a real resolution, how you write a real story that has an argument that's valid, because it wasn't contrived. You didn't start with the conclusion and then work your way backwards, right? You actually needed to figure it out and you put your whole heart and effort into it. And that's one of the services I want to be able to offer people when they're writing their own fiction, is not just to write well and have very elegant prose, because I do want to bring that back, because I think modern minimalism has eviscerated that and everyone writes in the same generica. But I want people to write things that are meaningful to them, that when someone reads it, that they, let's say, learn the lessons that the author learned through the process of constructing the story and living their lives, so that they don't have to suffer the same consequences stumbling blind in the dark themselves.
Mm,
So
mm. I like
that's
that.
that's
I like that idea, like how you start something without really knowing the end, but like you're taking that chance, like you say, just like for me, it popped in my mind. I took a couple classes at, well, it wasn't with classes, it was a test I had to pass, right? And I've not done that in years. So, I had to read a book, retain the knowledge, and then pass the test. So, in order to get my business license, which is, you asked if I had anything to show, I didn't think of it at the time, but Earnest Excavation and Concrete is what I'm building. That's my baby right now. Like that was my chance, my vision. I'm taking a gamble, right? Like, do I know where it's going? No, but I know where I want to start. I know where I'm at. So like that's it. So I took a test, I passed it. Took another test, passed it. So I had to take business and law, and then I had to take the excavation part. So now through the state of West Virginia, I'm a legal business entity. I'm able to. I imprinted the energy on March 28th, which the number 28 signifies wealth. So I had to do it that day, right? And I got it back. It was March 3rd, I think it was. So, which is real funny because I added everything up because I've been doing this lately with numerology, right? Like it's in me now. So it all equaled out to 9. I'm a life path 9, which is crazy. And then again, I got my business ID back, which the numbers added up to 9, which I thought was, is it a coincidence? Like it's just funny how that all come about. But yeah, so yeah, I took a chance and now I'm, wanting to start something, I want to build something. So I can relate that to what you're saying. I really like that.
well, that's awesome, man. And it's Earnest Excavation and Concrete
LLC.
LLC. All right, so you heard it here, folks. If you're in and around the tri-state area, Wheeling, West Virginia, and you are needing some excavation or concrete, Earnest Excavation and Concrete brought, or well, you're sponsoring us. I said that in the wrong order. But no, that's really awesome, man. And that was real slick bringing around the numerology again. I wasn't expecting that one, but yeah, it's you do find all these coincidences. I can be a bit romantic about it at times. Um, when you are when you have the faith in life that things that whatever is going to happen is what is good, right? So it's like, okay, uh, tell me if you have this, because I get this, and I've had some people really in my personal life balk at this, like respond really negatively to this attitude. But I've had it for a while, where let's say if I ask for a letter of recommendation for somewhere, I won't open it and read it. I won't know what the person said about me, and I'll hand it off to
Why?
somebody because my thought is if this person I ask to do this said something bad about me, then
Mm,
I don't deserve the job, right? Like whatever,
mm.
I can't know, right, what someone else really thinks. I can't dictate that. It's dishonest of me. I can't manipulate the universe in that way, right?
Do you feel embarrassed? Is that like the feeling you get when you like say you hand that letter off? Do you feel embarrassed to read it? Like, do you get the secondhand embarrassment?
I
Like,
mean, I do, but that's not. I mean, I get that about a lot of things.
yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah, so absolutely, I would get that, but no, it's part of me says like, no, 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 don't be tempted. Don't be tempted to curate, right? Like, for instance, if I get a bad review of my book, if I had the option to get rid of it, I wouldn't. And the reason why is because that is going that bad review or a bad letter of recommendation or like the failing of a test or the ruination of a particular friendship or relationship or the loss of a job. When you have faith, and we'll define that here in a second because that's something that I've tossed back and forth with different people on the podcast and myself. When you have faith, you've already decided that whatever bad, quote unquote, bad thing is actually good because that is what ought to have happened.
the unknown, right? Like,
Yes, so I've already accepted the unknown before I've encountered it. And actually, I think that's what faith is because I think the, the coming out of the new atheists back in the early 2000s.
the new
So
atheist.
that's that's like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett. In particular, I was on YouTube quite a lot, so some people might be familiar with the old YouTube atheists before most of them went insane.
What a
Uh,
tool! What a tool!
yeah, we had like what was it back then? DPR Jones, Thunderfoot, Aaron Raw, TJ Kirk, who's also known as the Amazing Atheist, Seth Andrews, and he was a thinking atheist. Concordance, who's more of a science-based YouTuber, but he hung out with those guys. There were others among that time that their names just don't come to mind. Occultama, um, Dark Matter 2525, Non-Stamp Collector. There's tons of these guys.
Wow.
Atheism is Unstoppable is one, but he came way at the end. The Armored Skeptic, he was a latecomer, and he's still around, I think, on YouTube. But anyway, that's like the background that I come from, and I think since the Enlightenment in like the 18th century, so 1700s and beyond, the idea of faith actually um, was a bit bastardized because I nowadays, if you ask people for a definition, to them faith is like a belief in a thing without just cause in believing that thing. And I do think that a lot of times when people say the word faith, that is what they mean for themselves. But I've thought about it, and I actually think like really, I think it's a stupid definition. I think that holds you back to have that definition. And the definition I've come to accept and the correct concept of faith, because otherwise, if you define it that way, faith is like gullibility and stupidity. And then like it's really easy for the atheist to come in and just like shit all over whoever is gonna do that. But a real definition is something like an attitude toward toward the universe and toward life that it is good. And what does that mean? It's like whatever is going to happen is what ought to happen, right? I have affirmed existence, even if I'm going to suffer terribly. I have faith that that is what is right, right? And the moment that you start doing that, these weird coincidences start happening all the time. Like things just get better all around you. Like you get better, the people around you get better. Opportunities that were invisible just come out of the ether that you never could have thought existed. And part of me thinks they were there the whole time, but because we were without that faith, you're kind of blind in a way, right? Because you're not willing.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's wonderful. I like that. Really do. I do.
yeah,
Yeah, because you could just sit there and literally be closed off to all of it, but it's all around you all the time when you put the faith, the effort, it does magically appear, doesn't it?
yeah. And I think the mechanism behind that is we are unwilling to see things that we judge as essentially being too painful. We want to ignore them.
Mm,
But when you ahead of time decide, I'm not going to judge those things as negative, I'm going to beforehand accept them, then all of a sudden we become willing to look. And when we become willing to look, then, well, then the opportunities now present themselves.
I like that.
Yeah. I mean, that at least that's what occurs to me when you run through the numbers of numerology and it all like lines up for you right as you're opening this new business and like man I hope that you reach the highest levels of success
Thank you.
attainable to you man it's
Thank you.
yeah no I love hearing anytime anyone is doing anything that is positive for them like what is it again? Jordan says like, be careful who you tell good news to. Like,
Mm,
I want to be
I love that.
yeah, I want to be someone that people can tell good news to.
So true. So true.
Yeah,
It is. It is. Like 90% of the people that you say that to have a secret vendetta, right? They have like this like willingness to see you fail. Like they don't want you to do better than them. They're
and you
like,
had people say like to you, like when you tell them that you're doing this business, they start giving you all these like quote unquote warnings, like they're trying to look out for you that are super discouraging.
yes,
Yeah, just like
absolutely.
this freaking slow. Oh, make sure you do this. Oh, by the way, you gotta watch out for this, and like
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
they're people who don't own businesses usually, right? I assume.
90% of the time, yeah.
Yeah,
You like people that do like have went down that road, like they know what the road is. Like it ain't no easy road, so they, like them are the kind of people that I like to gravitate to and pick their brain, because I want to know what they know. But yeah, for the most part, people that'll never take the shot, so to say, they're going to give you all the advice in the world, which is usually terrible advice. Yes,
yeah. It's almost like they're trying to sabotage your effort.
for sure. And
Yeah,
I had to learn, over time, like that particular thing, like because I just take everybody's opinion and like what they think for face value because like I think that maybe they have the same like idea that I do, that like I want good for everybody, right? I want people to do the best possible thing. I'm in the camp of like, like I run equipment. So my whole career, I've run into guys that like I looked up to. I seen they were good. They could do things I didn't even think was imaginable on that iron robot that they're on, that excavator, that big old piece of iron. And I'm just like blown away by their skills and what they know and how they do it, and them people, there's been several that have helped me, but for the most part, they don't want you to get to that point. So they're going to cut you down every step of the way, whether it's psychological or like however they do it, and I don't know if they intend to be that way, but I think inside they don't want you to take their job. So they're literally trying to derail you every step of the way. Cause that's what the past, when I was, 20 to 30, that's what I did was I run equipment. I learned from people in the union, local 132, just right down there in Glendale. That's what my profession was, pipeline, like really dangerous, hanging off hills on winch lines. I was on the ground learning that stuff, so I'd have to like hook up the winch lines and learn who was safe, who wasn't, not to get under stuff. But from the people that I admired, I've learned that even like the best of the best, like they don't want you to be anywhere near them and steal their spotlight, right? So I got a lot of failure in that line of work, a lot of failure. But like here I am now coming out on the other side, like I'm about to do my own thing, like take all that knowledge that I learned, like you said earlier. The people that you learn from ain't the ones that you like 90% of the time. There's always a message in there from the people that you don't necessarily get along with, and I think that over time I've taken the messages and, it might have been a net negative at the time, but over time it's turned into a net positive, so I like that a lot, like when you meet somebody, you might not get along with them, you know what I'm saying? And then like you automatically have this bias toward them, like you don't like them. So I don't know what it is there, but it seems like if you can hang around that person long enough and like try to be understanding, in the end, it's almost like you become closer to people like that. I've found that out. Like people that I initially don't like at the beginning of a conversation or just in general, over time, by the end of it, I become close with people like that. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is about that. It's weird.
Do you find the people that end up trying to keep you from getting to like where they're at, are those people friendly at the beginning?
Some,
Some.
yeah,
I wanted to know that whether or not there was a tendency for the people who aren't afraid of you, that who aren't afraid of you replacing them, who are willing to give you all of the help that you need. If there was a correlation between those people, um, sometimes being the hard to get along with people, or if you found those people easier to get along with, or if it's just a mixed bag the whole way through.
I I think it's kind of like that thing of like the generational curses that get passed down beyond generations. I think like that's how they learned was from that generation before them was to treat the people coming up that way, treat them like shit, and like hold them down because like I don't know what it is about that. Like not everybody's going to make an operator. Not everybody's going to be able to sit in that seat and have the pressure of hanging off a winch line or people working under your load and there's like a lot of pressure in that and like you watch it for so long. But yeah, I don't know what it is about that exactly. I would almost have to guess that that's what they were conditioned to believe from the generation prior, that like that's how you treat people. And it's just kind of like the theme of it, I guess. I don't know if that answers your question or
Well,
not.
it sounds like there's a bit of a mixed bag. Like sometimes you come in and you might have someone who um, they could treat you well, and then you know when you come up to take their spot, they get all threatened, or sometimes they could just treat you badly from the start, because that's their mode of vetting who deserves to be there, right? You think like the drill sergeant treats all the soldiers like shit, so that when shit hits the fan in the field, you can depend on them, right? And that you might have a guy
Yeah,
like that you work under, and he's a bitch to work under him, but by the time you get up there, he doesn't hold you back, and you're
right.
ready. Or
Maybe that
you
is.
might also have someone who keeps you like that. It's almost like the witch in Hansel and Gretel, right? Who keeps you lazy and happy so that you never have a chance and always has a reason never to give you the chance. Like there's that kind of guy, and then maybe there's a guy who just treats you like shit the whole time and never gives you a chance because he's frightened as soon as you fucking get there.
Yep,
So yeah, you don't really never really know.
definitely mixed for sure.
This brought to mind. Are you familiar with Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power?
I have dabbled a little bit.
I've been reading through. I'm about halfway through the book. I should be through faster, but then I started reading a bunch of other things, and I have this problem where I'll read like 5 or 6 books at the same time.
That's crazy.
It's stupid because I never get through anything.
I don't think I've read 5 or 6 books in my whole life.
You probably read it your whole life, but
I'm a visual learner, brother. Like, I mean, I've always got consumed in books. Like, I have, whenever I'm like in it, but like, I don't know what it is. It's like work.
it is rough, and particularly everyone's so freaking busy. Like you just have to. If I didn't live this poor hermit lifestyle for so long, I wouldn't have been able to read this much. And also, being in grad school helps because I had to read a whole bunch, and that cost like $100,000, but it was like an excuse. So it's until I can pay that back someday.
Yes.
That's one of my stretch goals. Yeah, don't be $100,000 in debt.
Good for you, though.
Well, hey, maybe the banks collapse. They'll do hyperinflation, and that like we'll just be taking $100,000 in wheelbarrows to burn to keep warm. I can pay off my debt super easy.
So what about that though? Like that interests me. No, like all this money they're sending to Ukraine and
We want to jump there.
like what is it though?
Monetary theory.
Yeah, like seriously, like what is it? Is it
Yeah.
a way to like traffic money, like to hide it? Because you know it ain't going all over there, right? Like, how do you become a president and make 250,000 a year, and then by the time you're out, like Obama, for instance, is a billionaire, but like it's like not on the books. It's just known. Like,
Yeah. So this is the what is it? Michael Malice. You familiar with Michael Malice? Anarchist.
I've listened to
Yeah.
a few
So
things. I
he's
just listened to him and Lex actually
yeah.
recently.
Oh, I need to listen to him because Lex. Anyone who will calm out like Michael down because Michael gets a little bit giddy by himself. But he points out that it is assumed that all politicians are corrupt, and what people get upset about is when they're depraved, like they're morally depraved. And the reason why is because if you think about what a politician is, it doesn't really matter what form of government. The politicians are the essentially the gang leaders who hold turf. So if you go back, let's say you had you're some village on the plains and like you pay tribute to some steppe horse warlord, and what that does is means okay, like if I don't pay them, they'll kill us, but if I do pay them, they also ride around and kill anybody else who comes around, because if they don't, then they'll other people will rob or kill us, and then they can't rob and kill us. So eventually you upscale that, you put on suits, and then you have the government, right? Cool. That's the reality of it, right? Talked to my buddy Leo Lane for the very first podcast we did, and he was down in Mexico and said like you kind of can't tell well, you can by their clothes, but like the cartel and the government are kind of the same, like in terms of their function down there. And of course it is, because the government is just a different cartel, and the cartel
Wow.
actually happens to be more powerful than the government. Anyway,
Really?
uh,
You think so?
uh, enough that they the government puts up with them and cooperates with them,
I mean, it's
because
no secret,
yeah,
right?
yeah, it's no secret. But so we talk about the money. Well, once we realize that, we realize that all politicians, it's just understood that there are going to be these white collar level backroom deals. Money's going to be changing hands. Um, what I think is the bigger deal is the fact that the money itself is all fake. So
Mm.
now we don't really. I always explain it this way, right? So everything comes down to food. That sounds kind of weird, so I'll explain it. We need to eat to live, right? No matter what, we need to be able to have food, and so our money is an abstraction of labor. There, fundamentally, the technology is an IOU note.
Medium of exchange.
Yes, um,
We agree that it has value, right?
sort of. So if you have money that's backed, let's say if you had money that's backed by rice, say for like, I don't know, this is ancient China, the Mongols have shown up and they now forced paper currency. And essentially, what that means is you have a note, and that note means I can go to, let's say, I think it was the Mongols, maybe it was the Huns, probably the Mongols because it's in China, but who knows? Doesn't matter. The point is, uh, I go to the Golden Horde's um, rice silo, and I hand them a note, and they'll take the note, and then that note gives me so much rice. Now, when I received that note, let's say I had given them a certain amount of rice. And the reason why you would use the money is that rice rots. You have to store it. It's hard to store. It's easy to have some hard to duplicate note and just pass those around, or coins, right? Oh, coins are the value can be in the coins themselves, right? You can have actual gold and silver coins, which themselves contain the value. But even like the paper money, even they used in China, the same concept, right? This is easier to deal with.
Yes.
Um, and so gold back money works the same way, right? Like, okay, we go to the goldsmith. He's got a big freaking vault. It's hard to steal from. We all give him our gold and say, okay, we're going to write down who has what, and we'll agree to pay you some small amount for the service of keeping our gold safe. And then he gets out, okay, well, here are all the notes. So you have this much gold, you have this stack of notes. So if you come back to me and you hand me the notes, I look at the ledgers. Yep, there we
There you
go.
go.
So that's money when it's backed by something. Now, when it's not backed by something, essentially what backs the currency, people don't think about this, but what backs the currency is threat of force by the government. So what the government says is if you don't pay your taxes, we're going to arrest you and seize your property. How do you pay your taxes? Well, no, not your job, your US dollars. They don't give a fuck where you get, fundamentally, they don't care where you get the money
This
from,
is true.
right? But what that means is what backs, it's called fiat currency that they can print at will, is the threat of violence against you.
Wow.
It's a safeguard against getting thrown in prison.
Yes.
That's what backs your money. So
Everything is loaned, basically, pretty much. Like you pay taxes on your house, your property, your cars, everything, right? I
yeah,
mean,
and that's because
and they say
the
you own it, but really, do you?
uh, technically speaking, you own it in the Lockean sense that you have the right to it, but in terms of real possession, kind of not, like, because if someone can come and seize it if you don't pay tribute, it's like you never really quote unquote own it. It's
Right.
not yeah. Um so there is that. But when we're dealing with, so that explains the value of fiat currency. It basically means that you don't you can pay your taxes, so you can maintain your property. So it's basically backed by tribute. Now we can talk about how the money is fake. So I mentioned it's fiat, basically meaning they can just at this point type numbers into computers. Now that is sort of like doing magic, right? Because if we remember our example when it was backed by gold, if I um, if I fake gold notes, promissory notes, basically, if I fake those, and then all of a sudden it is as if there's more gold in that vault than there is, which is okay so long as we don't need to pull the gold out. But we remember that gold itself, it has value, but fundamentally what that value comes back to is food. Because at the point at which your gold can no longer get you food, the gold no longer has any value. Food always becomes the value because you have to eat. Or like it could be like you can think of fresh water, maybe even shelter, kind of, but fundamentally food and water. If no food and water, you're dead pretty fucking fast.
For sure.
You can live outside. These are homeless people,
For sure.
right? So what that means is it's not a matter of, well, we can just pretend there's enough gold and we'll all be okay. It's a matter of as long as our current production of food is over what is being expended, um, based on the production of fiat currency or the inflation of the currency, we're okay. As long as everyone keeps producing enough food. But the moment that doesn't happen and you have to go into your rice silo to get the food that you have stored, and there's no food there. Now all of a sudden everything goes from it looks perfectly fine to shit is not fine at all, because now at that point there's not enough food to go around. And fundamentally with the what they're doing now is they're playing that game where, in modern monetary theory, they are pretending that this is merely okay. It doesn't matter how much wealth we actually have. If we manipulate people's behavior the right way, they'll keep producing enough and we'll all be fine. Now, the problem with that we find out is that's essentially a form of central planning. So you've got some bureaucrats who think they can control all of human behavior based on what they're doing from the top.
Communism.
Um, I would say socialism, because communism is a goofy utopia that they never reach and it always turns into fascism instead. Um, the Lotus Eaters, if any of our viewers or listeners are familiar, always like to say, Carl Benjamin in particular likes to say that fascism is socialism's final form,
Mm,
like it's like a boss battle in a video game.
mm. That you
Because,
can't beat.
well, we did defeat the Nazis and the
Well,
Italians. Um,
okay, yeah,
but it's a bitch, and it took the whole world versus the Germans,
right.
basically, right? So, but yeah, it's a form of
Interesting.
social engineering, and it never works. And the reason why it never works is it's really freaking complicated. But essentially, like the question is, we talked about this before. How much should a thing cost? And that is something that is impossible for an individual or a single group to determine. uh, how we calculate it is we let a marketplace kind of debate it out. And so, like, let's say that I want, I don't know, let's say a pen uh, costs, someone's charging $100 for a pen, and if I can take that pen and write a song that then I can use to, I don't know, sell to a guitarist. The guitarist sings that song and makes money off of that. Let's say I think the pen, it's the only pen, let's say, and everyone's vying to buy the pen. A lot of people, it's, well, I'm willing to pay $10 for whatever reasons, but I pay the 100 and I'm the most. If I'm right about the actual price of the pen, what ends up happening is that gives a signal to the person who sold the pen, like, I need to find a way to either acquire or make more pens because I just made a fucking $100 on this pen. And let's say I can buy $100 worth of food. It's worth it now for me to go and make more pens because I could sell for $100. And if I'm right about the $100 for the pen, I write the song. and I sell it to the guitarist, and if the guitarist is right about the song, okay, I buy the song for $1,000, and then now I own the song forever. So my whole life I can make money every time I go somewhere, and pretend there's no radio, right? Just to make this example work. And I can play the song and say each show I play earns me $100. So I play 10 shows. I'm now made up for the money I spent on the song, and can continue to travel around, play my guitar, sing the song that I bought off this guy. Who and you can see what happened is the guitarist is at the end of that chain who can continuously generate value out of the song. The song was generated out of the human value combined with the pen. The pen was acquired from some other guy, and at each level of exchange, the person had to know that they could, with what they're spending, produce more. Like I can mix my human labor in with this cost of resource, and then at the other end generate more value. Now that requires each individual along that stage to correctly assess their ability to do that. And your confidence to do that is determined usually by how much you're willing to spend. So if I'm willing to spend more than someone who's willing to spend $20, the person who's spending $20 probably doesn't think that they can produce that level of value with the thing. Otherwise, they would bid more, right? Now sometimes people have buyer's remorse and they make mistakes. So there's no perfect system, but that's how the market works to control itself. And let's say that something about the market changes, like let's say that there are no guitarists around that I could sell my song to, then I don't bid $100 on the pen. Say the next guy bids 50, but that guy can, I don't know, write a poem that he sells to some beatnik who goes into a jazz club and does his beatnik poetry, and then he makes a little bit less money. But see how that regulates itself. Now the production and the cost are now lined up. The guy who makes $50 on the pen instead of $100 now is going to invest less in pens than he otherwise would, because he can't get as much out, which is good, because if he invested too much, he would have too many pens. He would now have to sell the pens for less because there's so many pens, it's easier to get them. You see what I mean? And
Yes,
so the
absolutely.
whole thing is this constant moving organism.
Everybody's got a part to play.
And then now try to do that as a bureaucrat.
Right.
You don't know any of those fucking
Right.
steps. You're like some guy who's not even part of anything, and then you're trying to pull all these levers. And then what ends up happening, to bring this back around with money, because I know I just talked for probably like 15 minutes.
No, but
Uh,
it makes sense.
yeah, is that they essentially, what's going to end up happening? It's like a Rand novel. Um, is there's going to be some fundamental miscalculation in the social engineering. People are going to act in a way that they didn't suspect and don't want. Productivity is going to go down, and it's sort of like when you lose control of your car, you go from in control to it's spinning, and now as you're trying to fight control, like you might be making it worse because you don't know, because everything is spinning out. Like say you're on ice, and like you just, yeah. So economically, who knows? Like maybe a bunch of banks are going to collapse, because if something triggers everyone to pull their money out of the banks, like right now, I don't have a crypto wallet, but I am within the next week or so going to get some and start buying crypto. I was going to start buying Bitcoin as soon as I can find a secure way to do it, because I know it's like, okay, if I'm successful in the future and I start making money, I don't want to put my money in a bank,
Right.
because I don't trust that, one, the money's going to get inflated to hell and back, and who knows if I'm going to say something politically dissonant at some point, which I definitely will, and then and there's crackdowns. I don't know, that's maybe
Mm.
more far fetched than the banks
I
collapsing.
don't know. Oh
Yeah,
man, anything's possible, right?
yeah. Well, there's my 15-minute monetary spiel.
I mean, it's just like you say though, but like it's anything you do. Like even at work, say, the people that are running the show don't necessarily do the best job because the people below them might be smarter than them and see a better way, right? So it's like, but what's the best option? Like as far as I can see, it's not terrible. I mean, it's working in a way, but like if you got this person trying to do his very best and this person doing his very worst, does it balance it out? Like, there's always like,
Not according to the Pareto distribution, because the Pareto distribution is like the top 20% of people produce like half of the value. And so you've got like 80% of people are basically breaking even or are a net drain.
which guaranteed is going to happen in anything, right?
Yeah, and it scales badly. So like if you've got 10 people, it's actually not so bad. But if your business has 1,000 people, then all of a sudden you start adding up how much you have to pay the 80%, and that's like exponentially amount more. And so basically, that's also why businesses get so big inevitably fail because um, essentially it becomes harder and harder to balance, and it becomes harder to um, let's say know who it is and who isn't competent, and to like get rid of people who are incompetent. It's also why even startups go bad. Like I've seen startups where the business owner is competent and is smart, but as he becomes successful, he becomes more distant
Mm,
from the ground, and it becomes harder and harder for him to either find people to replace them, or maybe he doesn't trust them to do it, and so like the competent people either they leave or like he can't like it's a difficult balance, which is actually fortunate because what that means is there's a high turnover. So what that what you want is for errors to be corrected by the universe. Someone starts running a business badly, and it allows an opportunity for someone else to do it better to come in and dethrone them. And so, therefore, you get. Otherwise, what's the alternative? Stagnation, right? And then things slowly crumble in entropy. Um, and yeah, things, relatively speaking, things aren't so bad.
right.
I think,
The fact that we can even debate that shows that, like, it's
yeah,
really not that bad, right? Like, I mean, but it's definitely getting worse. No, I mean, we can all
yeah,
see that.
I'm happy that I don't have to have my shotgun loaded in the corner.
Facts,
Uh,
facts.
I have my revolver loaded though, so if you do break in at night, I will shoot you. Yeah, the Smith and Wesson.
Seriously,
Seriously, I will do that. And if I'm still writing on my computer, I might not have my gun, so I'll stab you instead of the giant sword. Um,
I contest. There's swords right here.
yeah, they're I keep weapons at hand. It's like that Kevin Hart skit where he talks about having a hidden gun compartment all over his house. Uh,
I've never heard it, but I'm sure it's hilarious.
it's funny. He goes on a little bit long with it. He gives way too many examples, but it was funny for the first like three where he
That's
goes through there.
hilarious.
But what was I going to say? There's something to that. Oh, how have you heard anything about the concept of a looming national divorce? So like the fundamental idea is like Texas is going to break away from the rest of the U.S. and then a
Okay.
bunch of other states are going to essentially join Texas, and either you'll have the remnants of the United States, and then a bunch of individual well, yeah, I guess it'd be like nation states, or you would have a Texas breakaway, and other states say, "We're gonna, hey, Texas, can we join you?" And they're gonna have like something like a north-south split, and some people are like, civil war, and other people are like, it'll never happen. The federal government will never let it happen. You haven't heard anyone talking about that
I mean,
lately?
I've heard of Texas wanting to secede from the union or whatever. I've heard like this is nothing new, right? Like this has been
No.
talked about for a long time, right?
Yeah,
But
well, Texas started out when they broke away from Mexico as a republic separate from the United States, and ended up
I didn't
getting
know that.
Yeah, they were like for like a decade. They were their own like sovereign republic.
Huh?
That's why Texas is like this because in their foundation, they were essentially their own country, and then they joined up with the rest of the U.S. After being separated from Mexico. What do you think of the idea? I don't know.
Um, I don't know. I guess I could go either way with it, but I don't know if it's a bad thing or not. I guess, that wanting to be independent and like obviously there's some real things happening in Texas. Like, I mean, you got like some big personalities moving there. I mean, it's no secret Joe Rogan's there now, Elon Musk is there now. I mean, and a lot of people have gravitated towards that. And I think it keeps you on your toes. You know what I mean? It keeps you like that hope. There's hope that like we don't have to settle for what is, and we can kind of make what we want. I guess I don't know if it's a bad thing. I mean, I think there would be a lot of collateral damage, and like the fact that like because obviously it's going to turn to like blows. No, like it's going to turn to like war. I mean, like
Maybe. Do you think American soldiers would because like right away my first thought is it's going to be like a 50-50 split, right? Like half of the military is going to say like I'm not going to go and march on Texas, So the other half might be willing because like maybe they think no, Texas, you can't leave. That's like treason. But then the question is, in that half of people, like, are you gonna really go do military operations on like your fellow citizens?
Your brothers. Yeah.
Because part of me is skeptical about that, and I think would the federal government want to do that? Like, would you want to like, okay, we're gonna seize back Texas and immediately have half of at least half of the military say, no, we're seceding to Texas too,
Right. Yeah,
because
that's
like, because you know in history like generals have done that, and like
oh, there's no doubt.
you might be like the bureaucrats in Washington, but like in a military chain of command, if you got a general and then the people under him, the people under him, the people under him are all like, nah, no, we literally have the guns, like the missiles that you have, you're like we're supposed to follow your orders, but the button is here,
Right.
and all
Right.
the technicians are here, and they're loyal to me and our people because we're, you know, it's not unrealistic that if essentially the threat of mutually assured destruction, right? Like it would be stupid, like
Right.
because I mean I'm sure there are some nukes stationed in Texas,
Mm, you
so
would
like,
guess
and it's not going to just be Texas. Like if Texas goes, Florida's going to be like, if you invade Texas, like Florida's going to help
for
Texas,
sure.
and then if Florida does that, then who else is going? to You see what I mean? Then like then all of a sudden it's like north or south.
But at this point, I mean, it almost seems almost inevitable in a way, doesn't it? Though, like the way people are gravitating towards Texas, Florida, like it's no secret. Like people can see that there is a depression incoming, like artificially stimulated, like you was talking about. Like we'll just hold a couple of the bags of rice here and squeeze it off a little bit there, and like we was talking about, you know, the money they sent to Ukraine, and it's like, at what point, you know, does people say enough's enough? You know, like what if we got to stand for something? No, like you think about all the money they've printed in the last what couple years, 8 years or so. Like they printed more money then than has ever been circulated before. You know, and like people at work say, "Oh, we're getting $1 raise," and I'm thinking to myself, "You can't be that fucking dumb." Like we literally have no value on our money now. Like period. Like and then you look at like her car just went down and we're sharing a little car right now and I got to go buy a car with like interest rates rising and you know not so good credit and it's just like it's I don't know. It's just it's tough. You know, people's you could you're starting to feel the struggle a little bit. You know, you're starting to feel it. At least I am. And it's like if it keeps going this way, like when is enough enough, right? Like
Well, I think you kind of named it with your own revelation. I think enough is enough when enough people realize that hell is a bottomless pit. When the price of food is high enough that you are seeing people robbing each other like in the street and you don't feel safe at home. Um, when you yourself are hungry and like we don't have all these comforts. When, you know, because we're all used to like everyone's got like cell phones and television and your house is at least somewhat well protecting you from the elements.
for sure.
When all of those comforts, all the distractions
Mm,
suddenly become luxuries outside of our reach,
mm,
I think then, like, I can't imagine people not waking up. And then they realize hell is a bottomless pit.
mm.
And then they say, no more. Like, I'm not participating in this at all. And then, like, then maybe we'll have some type of, uh, let's say, hopefully properly balanced revolutionary spirit that doesn't just devolve into total chaos because that would be bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I don't think anybody wants that, right? Like,
Or the I don't know what we said. Should remember the spirit of Cain, the will to vengeance. There,
yeah. I guess if you would have come at me in my 20s, you know, I would have been a little more righteous for the cause, I guess. But now, like, I've become softer with children and whatnot. Like, I don't want to see that, you know?
let's say wiser. You're
Wiser.
probably not softer. You're probably softer when you couldn't get by the day without like narcoticizing yourself. Because I can't imagine you can't describe like the needing to constantly cloak oneself in a numbing of sensations harder, right? In fact, you could say like that was like the softest point. and then the hardness comes with getting up in the morning, wanting to stay wrapped up in your warm sheets and saying, no, I got to do some work.
Yeah.
All right. We've been going for a couple hours, man. This has been a fun one.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it quite a lot. Anything else you want to talk about before we go?
I mean, I just kind of was like, just kind of hanging on for the ride, man. Like I said, I enjoy, picking your brain. You're a very interesting guy. Fucking, I appreciate the opportunity to even come over here and do this. This was, I've been looking forward to it, and I'm just grateful that you even asked. I just, I don't know. I have hope. I hope everybody else has hope too. And like I said, at one point I didn't have hope, so that's a scary thing to like be hopeless. To like I just like encourage people to try to find something that gives you a little bit of passion that that you can see that things do get better because it's a scary road to go down to be nihilistic, and have no sense of purpose, you know. Um, but yeah, just like I said, I'm grateful to even be alive. I feel like it's a like I didn't experience anything before this life, and I feel like I just woke up a few years ago anyway. So just really grateful to be here. So
Well, I'm grateful to have you, man. Let's show your new company. So Earnest Excavation and Concrete LLC.
that's it,
All
buddy.
right. So if you're in Wheeling, West Virginia, visit our sponsors today. They're not really a sponsor, but I'm glad to give you a shout out.
Thank you.
Yeah. And what particular do you sell equipment? You said.
Just basically dirt work, concrete. You need a foundation dug. Water's destroying your property. You can reroute it, put in pipes. Concrete wise, like you're in the mud, you need to park your cars. That's basically the foundation of my company is that dirt work, concrete, and then from there, I got to take some more tests and get covered. Get through some of that yellow tape. But as far as it goes now, I can get in there with the equipment and I can lay the concrete. So that's the foundation of my business anyway. So
And how we know people freaking need it. All the houses and property decaying and water damage is just constant here in Wheeling in this little valley. So yeah, look out for Alan's company, Earnest Excavation and Concrete LLC. And as for me, visit my website, wildilelit.com, for all the stuff we're doing. Got all the rest of the podcast on here, or there, I should say. Again, my book, my novel, Wand Smoke Broken, a fantasy fiction novel, reads like a bit of a wild western. Or you can think of it like European fantasy with an American twist. First chapter is free on my website. I even have an audio track. You can listen to me read it and lose my voice most of the way through. I've got my blog as well. If you're interested in East Asian philosophy, I blog about that all the time. I've got essays. I've got my editing service, which I'll be updating here soon. So be on the lookout for that. I'm really excited to open up the Wide Isle Style Guide and to, let's say, make philosophers of us all out there writing fiction with my thematic guidance as well. I'll have better names for these things. I'm just rattling off the top of my head. All right, friends, fellow philosophers, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll see you the next time.